June 25th meeting of the school committee will come to order. As is our tradition, please join me in pledging allegiance to our flag and our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would like to approve the June 25th agenda. I have no changes. Any other changes? Approved as seen. Yes, hi.
Hi. The advancement positions, are
Yes.
those being voted tonight? That's what it says on the agenda, but I
No.
didn't know that we finalized the positions, the position, job descriptions.
Correct.
The job descriptions, it was the FT.
The vote would be to approve the change from half-time to full-time positions.
I guess, as a matter of policy,
Yes?
the positions, the job descriptions need to be established first. And then, we didn't establish it as part of the budget process because we didn't know where we were going to get them. So now we're at the point where we're establishing job descriptions, which is one of the roles of the school committee, to approve what the superintendent puts forward for job descriptions. And then, if there's budget implications, that's a whole nother issue. At least that's the way I read it.
I think we're approving positions, not job descriptions.
I guess I would argue that these positions are new job descriptions, never established before, and therefore part of the process. And granted, maybe we're taking it out of order, maybe that's the way we need to do it, would be establishing the job descriptions and then deciding what the implications are for budgetary purposes.
Well, while the superintendent has solicited input on the job descriptions, which I think is entirely appropriate, I want to make the distinction that the school committee is not in the business of determining specific responsibilities, but rather approving budget and positions.
And so I would refer you to policy GCA, which is professional staff positions. That says all professional staff positions in the Milton Public Schools will be created initially by the school committee
Yes, check.
or as directed by law.
Yeah.
So we have yet to create them, I guess
I
is my
think
point.
we created them when we approved the advancement budget
Yeah,
and approved those titles. What we didn't approve was that they were full-time positions rather than half-time positions, which is what we approved when we approved the fiscal 15 budget. We approved
Okay.
these titles when we approved the advancement budget.
The titles, I guess, yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, for you, those of you watching at home, that was a brief commercial. We have no one for citizen speak, so we'll move to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chairman Walker. Why don't we begin with item B? I'd like to invite to the table Principal of the Tucker, Dr. Elaine McNeil-Jermai, and Stephanie Nephew, Tucker's curriculum coordinator. So to the discussion of the advancement budget for FY15, we have a preschool model that we had proposed in the advancement budget, and Dr. Jermai and Ms. Nephew have been working on the proposal and have created a team, and we wanted to have them make a presentation to you tonight. So welcome.
Thank you for having us. So obviously this year we've been really thinking a lot about early literacy in the schools. And just as a little excerpt, we also brought to share with you a flyer for our Tucker Reads website that we've been working on that we presented earlier this year with the site council. So it is now live. We hope you'll visit it, and we feel like, this is just one of the building blocks to support families at home, to build the homeschool partnership around literacy and discussing books, outside of the school day. When we started looking at our early literacy data earlier this year with Mary and John, we noticed, kind of across the board, particularly in kindergarten and first grade, that we were seeing a lot of siblings across the school where literacy continued to be a concern. A lot of families that were consistently below grade level. And we started to think to ourselves, is there a correlation between what these students were doing before they came to school? And we did a little bit of research and found that a lot of them did not have access to any kind of formal preschool or care before school outside of the home. So we started doing a little brainstorming around if we could provide a little bit more support for families that have children at home at that age, in the sense of having a place where they could learn more literacy skills. While we know it's a homeschool partnership, we know that some families may not have all of the literacy tools at home that they need, and wanted to have Tucker be a place where we could perhaps provide that. So that's where this kind of initial began thinking, coming up with that plan. So the goals of this preschool program would be to promote early literacy and create a foundation, develop social and school readiness skills for students before kindergarten, and connect families within and to the Milton Public School System by providing resources to families, getting them to meet staff that could be integral in the transition, and support students' learning in their home. So Stephanie's going to share a little bit of the logistics about what we think we need to do to make it happen.
So we do have space at Tucker where we'd be able to house the preschool program. Obviously, this year would be a pilot in terms of what it would look like. Our goal would be to really target students that would be entering kindergarten the following year, so student 4-year-olds. Our hope is to do this 2 days a week for 2 hours each day. It would be a drop-off environment, so students would be coming, families would drop them off. Our hope is to have a parent or guardian connection, so during that time to have an opportunity when the students are dropped off to have some seminars or workshops or things that we can be doing with families as well to get families involved, and also have a component where families are participating within some of the activities within the program as well.
So just to kind of add on to that, we see this, potentially being a really nice connection to the parent liaison position that's being established for next year. So, again, perhaps some opportunities to do some monthly sessions for preschool families that could really be across the district. And, we're starting to partner with a few different organizations we'll talk through, one of which is the Milton Early Childhood Alliance. And so, working with them to see what programs they have in place that we can really offer to a broader base in Milton and really support a lot of different families, even if they're not in a preschool pilot. Additionally, for the parent role, so we're thinking of doing kind of 3 rounds of 10 sessions. So thinking about 12 students per session. So, a maximum about 36 students that we could reach in a year's time. And what we would like to do for each of those designated 10 weeks, that's about 20 sessions. So asking families to commit to being there for at least 2 of them. So while it would be, kind of a drop-off opportunity, we would ask for some commitment from the families to be there, be present, and, participate in a read aloud or do a math lesson with the students so that again, that's something they can take home with them as a resource to use with their child.
We've met a couple of times and have sort of formed a committee to gather ideas, again, because this is a new initiative and a pilot, and sort of thinking through the different pieces. School committee member Becky Padera, Superintendent Mary Gormley, myself, Elaine, Ada Rosemarin will be a valuable member. She really oversees our full day K program, and it would be a nice connection and transition from preschool to K. And as Elaine has mentioned, Susan Dolan, who is the director of Milton Early Childhood Alliance, came to our last brainstorming meeting and was a huge asset in terms of giving us some ideas around the things that would work and what she's doing and how it connects. So we hope to continue with this team as we develop the program, and also as we look at the program next year and what's working and what's not, and really beginning to improve it as we move forward.
That's where we are right now, and again, continue to meet over the summer to move forward with next steps.
Ms. Padera?
I just wanted to, because I know Mr. Zulus would be interested in, and one additional thing we talked about was the partnership with the Milton Public Library, because I think you have someone on staff that's involved in that.
Yes, so Sarah Trogue, who is our Milton librarian, she's also a Tucker parent, and she's in the process of switching from part-time librarian to full-time librarian there. So she's expressed an interest in, maybe not as much of a partnership as she's had in the past with the librarian, but continuing to do some book clubs and activities at the school. And so I've asked her if she could also commit to helping us maybe do a book baggie program or coming in to do some reading with the classes, and she's definitely open to that as well.
Ms. Kelly?
Thank you for all the participants in this group, because I think it's a great proposal. And I think when we first talked about the advancement initiatives, this is certainly one direction that we wanted to be moving in, so this is fantastic. So a couple things. The first is, in terms of the parent involvement, I think that's fabulous to ask for it. I, as a working parent, would have a hard time doing that. And so I would hope that, there would be flexibility around that, or perhaps some evening opportunities that parents could come in and help around the same initiative. I think that would be great. But the other thing that I inquire, just because I'm on the finance subcommittee, is what are we talking about for costs around this program?
So in terms of, staffing, what we're hoping to do is, again, it's about 4 hours a week. We'd want to have a little bit of time there for planning as well. So trying to identify a part-time teacher to bump up a little bit to do this work. So it would be kind of less than a 0.2, I would say, in terms of position. And we're also trying to develop an internship proposal. I've contacted Curry College and have been talking with them about seeing if we could place somebody in an internship as well.
That's great. And so were you thinking about a preschool teacher, or do you have specifics, or were you talking about a preschool teacher, or?
Yeah,
okay.
a certified preschool teacher.
May I, to Mrs. Kelly's point, I brought that up to Mrs. Kelly about working parents and guardians, and the advocates for preschool brought to my attention that perhaps whoever was doing the daycare for these children, it would even help them to be able to come. And they even went as far as, when they participated in the session, providing daycare somewhere on the site for other children that they may have to mind. But that was a huge component for modeling and to give. And as one of you said in the meeting, even if it were a grandparent, they would then bring the lesson back and could share it, minding the children or with other parents. And so it was very valuable meeting with Susan Dolan.
Yeah.
She brought to our attention the network in Milton and the number of families who are seeking daycare, and the slots aren't available in the town. So that we talked about going, Mr. Walker had brought it up as one of the issues townwide, and identifying children who aren't in formal daycare. But we believe that our parent liaison position that we'll be discussing later and later in the summer will be able to help us reach out in the town.
Sharon?
Similarly, my questions were aligned with theirs. So you're making a 2-session requirement, actually, of the parents, and that's great. That partnership needs to be, built and supported and all of those great things. But I think that the comments that were just made around, grandparents and other family members, and that's such a rich environment, that's really important. So if you say, a minimum of 2, how do you support them? Because I'm sure that the work that's being done with those parents is different. So you might have some parents that are only going to be there for 2 sessions, but you will also get parents that are going to be there for all 10, right? Or 10 weeks, 20 sessions. So how do you share that information with the parents that can only be there for 2, or whoever the guardian, the parent figure, or the support staff, the support people around these children? So how is that information shared with them? How is, are there handouts? Are there can you videotape it and put it online? Can you, the ideas are, infinite, actually, when you get to think about it. And I would really, this is such a powerful project that you're talking about. I mean, it's, I won't even go into it in all the detail, but it's just a very powerful educational piece that you're proposing here. And I think it's really important for us as a school committee to support that. But I think thinking outside the box, how do we get it to as many people as possible? If parents are working, as Mary said, or parents, can't come to any of these, or they're,
Right.
So I guess I'm just raising all those questions. Thank you.
And one of the things that we had talked about is to have the parent involvement piece is sort of twofold. The type of parent involvement that would the first piece, them being in the classroom, and so having that type of environment and having people be in the classroom and be in that environment, but then also to have the opportunity to do workshops or activities outside of the classroom where it's just parents. And one of the things that we had talked about, and again, I shouldn't say just parents, it's parents, guardians, grandparents, it's whomever is taking care of children, and to open that to not just this population of students that are participating, but open it to a larger population. Because really the topics that may be covered, many people might want to participate in them. And so just your thought about how to reach a larger group, I think that's something that's really important. And thinking about when we offer it, it can be during the time that we're providing the preschool for the children, but it can be at night, it can be early morning, and to offer it to a larger group of people. So it doesn't necessarily have to just be the children that are participating, it can be other families as well. So how we advertise that and how we communicate it is going to be really key.
Mr. Zulus?
So thank you. This adds some, appears to add some great meat to the bone of the early literacy initiative. One question to harken back to what Mary said about cost. So if we're talking about a .2, are you thinking about $10,000 in additional cost, roughly? And right, so about $10,000. Any other additional cost beyond that you can just as we kind of sketch this out and figure out where we can get the money for it?
I think we will have some general needs in terms of setting up the classroom, and that's something we're still sort of working through.
But we have the 20,000 in the advancement budget, so we'll put that towards kind of the furniture and all those things that would be, set and in place, so it wouldn't be a recurring cost.
So this is already accounted for in the budget?
Yes.
So this isn't anything additional?
The 20,000
Okay.
is already accounted, we have $20,000 in pre-K text materials already accounted for in the advancement budget.
But the .2 would be...
.2 is not.
The .2 would be on top of that. So that would be the only additional cost beyond what's already been allocated in the budget?
Included in. It's already included in.
So just the 10,000 on top of what's already in the budget?
Ms. Bagley-Jones and then Ms. Padera.
Just like everybody else, it's a great idea, and you're thinking outside the box, and it's wonderful. I guess you said initially that you had families that you knew of had younger siblings.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, since it is a fairly targeted program, are you able to survey those families to find out where the kids are during the day? Is this even possible? I mean, as a working mom myself, I couldn't get my kid there
Right.
at 8:30 to
Right.
10:30.
Right.
So is there a way to ask those families where they are and if this would work for them? And then also with the success rate of the Milton Early Childhood, reaching out to those I forget what's called, the daycare collaborative, where the daycares know each other,
Right.
in Milton, to see if it could be more connected. Because
Right.
it's a great
Yeah.
program, but concretely, how do you get kids there?
Right. And in talking to Susan Dolan, she runs a number of playgroups, ages 2 through 4, and so a number of families are utilizing that. And so we had talked about a possibility of sharing sort of this program and almost being a feeder program. They're going to these play groups with her, and then at age 4, maybe attending the preschool with us. So we're hoping that we can communicate to families by sharing our information within those play groups could be a possibility.
Thank you.
I think
And
it-
if I might
yeah.
add to that, at kindergarten screening during the last month, surveys were given to every family about younger siblings and what kind of setting those younger siblings have been in. So we think we were able to secure some great data from 320 children coming to kindergarten screening. And I think the wealth of families that we have in the Milton Public Schools, the kindergarten teachers know the children who haven't been in a formal daycare setting, and they'll be able to reach out to those families.
There?
Yeah, just the last thing, because you touched upon it, but I think it's a really exciting part of your program is the literacy books, because it's not just sending a bag home with a book. When we're talking about parental involvement, it's a big part of that, especially if parents that work during the day and only able to access these things at home. They'll include reading materials, but also activities that the parent or guardians can use to interact with the kids and provides, more stimulation, because 2 days a week is just really touching a little bit on it. But if we increase some of the involvement at home as well was one of the goals. So I think that's a really exciting aspect of it in terms of getting to the parents and getting involved with these families to help model some great activities at home. And Ada is key at creating those for us. So that's another exciting part of it.
Definitely.
So I would just like to thank both of you and each member of the committee, Ms. Padera and others. We've had early literacy on our radar for the last 3 years, but the notion of some work with preschool students was something that actually Ms. Padera raised only a few months ago. So the fact that we've got a quality program this soon is just wonderful. So thanks for your work on that, and it's going to be it's going to change some lives. So that's what we're here for. Thanks, Ms. Kelly.
Sorry, I know how you like to be last.
I thought that was the chair's role, but
I know.
I try to
I
wait
wasn't
until
sure.
last. But
Sorry. I just want to, as a pilot program, I would hope that we create some goals that are measurable so that we can, evaluate and keep on improving just as a matter of how we, start the process.
We have, I was just going to say, we have talked to Ada about using some of the same assessment tools that they're using in kindergarten to measure some growth next year.
Yeah, we definitely want to make sure that we're able to see if the program is productive and effective, and to be able to have some data to back that up.
And I guess I'd be as interested in the assessment data of individual students who are participating in the program as the number of families that you're reaching and their participation, et cetera.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting idea, to reach out to a local university for someone to do a pilot program evaluation. And to the point Mr. Walker had asked, would you give an update on your Tucker Scholars will be housed here for the summer, and your outreach to kindergarten parents so that we have a full enrollment in summer school?
Sure. So we utilize some of the data from kindergarten screening for our incoming students to invite families. We're also inviting siblings of students that were enrolled in the program in upper grades. So we try to have about 12 per session, and right now we're at a solid 8 or 9, and we just have a few pending that I think will be confirmed before the end of the week. So that's already been a great resource that I think will really support students coming in. And I know that they felt really strongly last year that some of the social skills of just, what it's like to be in the classroom, it was really helpful to have had a few of our students last year in the summer. And we saw some behaviors change in that time before they started school.
I want to compliment you for doing that, because traditionally, the summer school program serviced children that were already in the school, but to reach out, and it hasn't been an easy job, which I think you'll find, reaching out to find these children, as all the school committee has noted, that will be able to get to the site. But that's wonderful work.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Now I'd like to ask to join us at the table Attorney Paige Tobin, Murphy, Lamry and Murphy. Good evening, Paige. So the school committee had, we had read in their own professional organizations' materials, and we have given them an update. You know what, sometimes you might feel more comfortable if you're looking about the new student discipline rules, and Attorney Tobin did a presentation for our leadership team, who asked for a follow-up presentation and to expand the initial group. It was a tremendous presentation, and again, resulted in a tremendous number of questions. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and welcome tonight, Paige.
Hi, good evening. I'm going to actually just sort of summarize what the regulations are. Otherwise, it will be, I think, a very probably longer presentation than people are needing to see. But essentially, what has happened is there has been amendments to the student discipline law that really are going to have a great impact on student discipline in all, public schools. And it was a result of the legislature thinking that there was too much of an emphasis on zero tolerance, and that students were being excluded from school for long periods of time, sort of inconsistently. There wasn't consistency across school districts, and that the outcomes for those students is really quite poor. So the purpose of the statute really has been to encourage school districts to find alternatives to long-term suspensions and expulsions of students. And that really is the purpose. And the new regulations have many requirements that will make it beneficial for principals to find alternative ways to long-term suspensions. So currently, the foundations of student discipline are in our United States Constitution, in which there are two main features of due process. There's procedural due process, meaning did we follow our handbooks, state laws, and federal laws, and follow the process that's outlined in those. And then there's substantive due process, which is our decision that we make about a student regarding discipline consistent with other decisions that we've made and sort of fair and equitable. And then our student handbook and school policy also outline student discipline as well as state law. Under state law, generally speaking, students may only be disciplined for conduct that happens in school or at a school event or at a school-related activity, with the exception of certain situations under the new bullying law in which students that engage in bullying outside of school, but if there's an impact in school, may possibly be disciplined. And then there are two statutes which are listed in the slide. One is 37H, and that really talks about students who have possessed drugs, weapons, and assault on staff, actually on school grounds, and 37H and a half, which provides that students who are charged with a felony, whether it be resulting from conduct in school or outside of school, may be excluded if the principal makes a determination that the student's continued presence in school would pose a substantial detriment to the general welfare of the school. So those are the state statutes that really talk about student discipline, previous to the new statute. So So again, this act, I think we talked about this, is really with a purpose of making sure that there's not a zero tolerance policy. Principals are using discretion, and really most importantly, that when students are excluded from school, they still have the ability to make educational progress. And so this new act is going into effect July 1st, 2014, and the legislature just came up with, DESE just came up with some regulations that are going to support it. So the main change for 37H, again, which is the statute that addresses students who possess drugs, weapons, or assault staff on school property, it's unchanged except that the student now, regardless of whether they're a special education student or a regular education student, will be allowed to make academic progress during the period of exclusion. So what the state has said that means is if the student is excluded for 10 days or less, they'll now be allowed to make up all of their work, make up their tests, and there should be some system that the teachers will be able to provide that material to the students. For students who are excluded under the statute for more than 10 days, each school building will need to develop an educational service plan that will allow the student to receive educational services during the period of exclusion. And again, it will be different for each school building, and my understanding is that the principals in the district are starting to work to make these educational service plans. It may include tutoring, it may include online courses, and it will, I think, vary between buildings and grade levels.
Excuse me, Mr. Walker, are we allowed to ask
yeah.
questions as we go along, because it's kind
Sure.
of detailed, so, I'm sorry, Paige, you're talking about a period of more than 10 days?
Yes.
So we don't usually suspend students for 10 days at a time, so once a child has been suspended for more than 10 days, then this takes effect, is what you're saying?
Yes. Less than 10 days, they'll still be able to make academic progress, so they'll get their work again and opportunities to make up tests. For more than 10 days, they will actually, be provided some educational services in some form from the school district.
So students could be suspended hypothetically 10 times for one day, but as soon as they cross that into the 11th day,
Yes.
a typical child or general ed student would then, okay, all of them would, but
Yes.
it's different for sped kids. Thank you.
Yes, again, with the purposes of making sure that they continue to make progress during their periods of exclusion. And that, again, for 37H and a half, which is the statute that addresses students who are charged with or convicted of felonies, again, that statute remains the same except for the same provision about academic progress.
I'm sorry.
Ms.
Can
Kelly?
we stop right there?
Yeah.
Sorry. So if somebody's convicted of a felony, the individual school district is responsible for their academic progress?
If the student is charged with or convicted of a felony,
Yes.
and the principal of the building makes a determination that the student's continued presence in school would pose a substantial detriment to the general welfare of the school, that's the term.
Yeah.
Then the student may be excluded for a significant period of time, and during that period of exclusion, under the new law, that student will be entitled to receive educational services if they are excluded for more than 10 cumulative days.
And I think it's important, I think the school committee's familiar with, prior to this law, if a child was on an educational plan, you would have to provide education for the child, the student. But now this will encompass all of our children.
Correct. It is really the procedure and the law that applied to special education students. It now, that educational services would be provided. This will extend to regular education students. There will be some differences in the standard. The special education students have rights under federal law to a free and appropriate public education FAPE, and it's not, that requirement is not necessarily embedded in this new statute, so that may be a little more legalese, but yes, it does extend.
But you could see why the principals wanted to bring back Paige, and we'll be discussing with you, cost, whether it's online or tutoring, and the monitoring and the responsibility.
So, and this may be a crazy example, but quite frankly, the whole legal part of this I don't understand, but if somebody was convicted of selling drugs, are you saying that, well, first of all, if they're underage, I don't know what happens to them. Do they go somewhere? And are we still responsible? I guess I'm trying to figure out where the line gets drawn that says we're responsible for bringing them back into the school district.
We don't need, if a student is charged with or convicted of a felony, and the principal makes the finding about detriment, their presence is detrimental in school, the principal can exclude the student, so they're not returning to school, but we have to have a plan to allow them to make educational progress. So whether it be tutoring that we provide in another location, whether it be online courses, again, that will be up to the individual principal of each building to determine.
And again, I'm sorry for my ignorance, but if a underage child, or whatever we're going to call them, is convicted of a felony, are there any repercussions for that? I mean, it used to be you would go to,
Department of Youth Services.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Does that
So-
still happen?
Yes, students would still, potentially be committed to DYS. And then the state generally makes arrangements between the school district and the state to provide services to students who are committed to DYS. But again,
This is bizarre. I will put it right out there. It seems to me that to have, and I don't know how many school districts the Department of Youth Services would oversee, but it seems it would be better to have some sort of educational umbrella under their umbrella so that services could be provided in a productive manner, but that's just my thought.
And generally, there are mechanisms where DYS actually has service providers who do provide those educational services, but again, it would be funded by the district. And the funding for all of this statute does come from circuit breaker. So although it would be not very likely, in my opinion, that most of the services to be provided would reach the threshold for circuit breaker, just so you know.
It's a possibility, you're saying.
Ms. Sheridan, then Ms. Padera, then Ms. Bagley-Jones.
So my understanding is that if a child is deemed under the rule of DYS, if they're committed to DYS, then they will receive services from DYS. And if they do, they may be in consultation with the teachers here just to find out what the needs are of the child. But Milton wouldn't be responsible for providing those services or even necessarily the materials. It's more or less a conversation. I may be wrong, but
I think they would be, again, DYS has a mechanism to provide them. I'm not quite sure now what the funding, funding may
okay, so
shift
that may
in that
change.
regard,
But
yes.
based on Common Core state standards and expectations on grade levels, that's how that all would be provided. I think I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
And then just to talk about the students that are on IEPs, I just have a question about the manifestation determination. So is that's a meeting that has to happen for all children who, once if they're on an IEP and they've been suspended for 10 days, then you have to have a manifestation determination meeting where you decide, is this child being suspended because of their disability? Are the suspensions due to the disability or is
Caused by or substantially related to the student's disability, yes. And that is a federal law, and that will not change.
Okay, that was my question.
At all. However, the mechanism in terms of timing is going to be a little difficult once we
Cross
kind
that
of go
line.
further along and hear what will be required before any suspensions.
Sorry.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
which I'll talk about. So they added this new section, which is 37H and 3/4. And again, this is really the section that is going to, require, sorry. Okay, so this section requires new responsibilities for school
Age, we had a
districts.
couple more questions.
Oh, I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Padera and then Ms.
Apologize.
Bagley-Jones.
So I just have basically 3 questions, and I'll just ask them, and I can repeat them. But, so the first is, I'm assuming from the beginning of this that this may change our policy or our determination for whether we can suspend or expel a student, is my first question. You can go ahead and answer that too first.
There are more due process
Issues.
rights that are given to students under the new section 34H, 37H and 3/4.
Okay.
Yes.
And then my second question is, and it kind of goes along with what everybody's saying, but if a student, I'm assuming since we don't really suspend unless, we keep suspending a student over 10 times, that 10 days or more is almost likely to be an expulsion issue. So if a student is expelled and they have, several years left in their academics, so are we, from what you're saying, are we required to provide educational services for them until they either go to another district or they turn 18?
Under the new under 37H and 3/4, students will no longer be able to be expelled for more than 90 school days.
They won't be able to be expelled at all.
Correct, unless it's a situation under 37H, which is the drugs, weapons, assault on staff,
Okay.
or 37H and a half, which is felony. Except for those two, students will not be able to be expelled or excluded for more than 90 school days.
And in that determination, we would have to be providing them services until they're 18 age or until they move to another district?
It would, if they move to another district, the other district would need to hold a hearing to decide whether to allow them to attend or whether they would then take over.
Right. And if, otherwise, is it their 18th birthday, or, I don't know what the age would be.
Actually, that's an interesting question. For special education students, they have rights until 22.
Right, exactly.
And there is not an age in the law, so, and not in the regulations as far as I recall.
And then, I had one other question.
So I would imagine it would be until they get a high school diploma, but the state right now doesn't have a maximum age for enrollment.
I wasn't sure if it would be 16 or 18 until while they're required to have education. And then my last question is this: who determines what the school's acceptability of what they're providing is? Do you know what I'm saying? It could be, is it the parent? Is the school district itself? Is there any outline for, with IEPs, there's a certain if the parents don't accept that, there's a certain standard for how you proceed. But certain schools might vary in terms of what they find is acceptable in terms of educational progress.
I think the law requires the student to get services that are going to allow them to make academic progress. So, and the school-wide educational plans will be submitted to the state.
Mm-hmm.
So I would assume that if the state found them to be insufficient, then they would let the district know that their plan is not sufficient.
Okay, great, thank you.
Bagley, Joe.
Mine is just a vocabulary question. So throughout this, the words long-term suspension, excluded, suspended, expelled are used, and they seem to be interchangeable, but we can no longer expel. So what's the difference between exclusion and expel? And it's very confusing because they're used on page 6, page 8.
Right. I always view expulsion as a permanent
Right.
exclusion from school, and suspension is, generally speaking, a specific period of
But you
time.
said we couldn't expel, so,
So permanently expel.
okay.
But, and the regulation, people talk about sort of exclusion or expulsion sort of as being, again, more permanent or longer term than a suspension.
Okay, so permanent, okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Zulus, then Ms. Kelly.
So as an example, if a student were convicted of a capital crime and incarcerated at age 16, for example, the district would still own, and then the student were expelled as a result, the district would still own that student's education until the student either got a diploma or at some age?
Yeah, I'm actually not aware, I would think that what DESE would find would be probably to the age of 21 or 22, which is sort of 22 is the maximum that special education students are entitled to receive services.
Mhm.
It would be hard for me to think that they would
Go beyond.
say beyond that,
Right.
but it's not clear
Okay.
from what I've read.
Ms. Kelly?
So you had mentioned, with regard to expulsions, assaults on education staff. What about assaults on other students?
assaults on other students is not under 37H or 37H and a half. So if there's an assault on another student, if it results in a felony charge, again, the principal then could hold a hearing to determine if the student's presence in school was detrimental and then expel on that grounds. But if there's an assault on a student that doesn't result in a felony charge, then it would, that student would be, that would be sort of a regular school disciplinary event under 37H and 3/4, which is the new statute.
And again, just because I'm ignorant of this, what's the difference between assault on education staff and an assault on another student?
Just the law, if you just read 37H, it applies to drugs, weapons, and assault on staff. It's the statute. Okay.
Just very
Oh, please.
quickly,
Yep.
did you say the principal would hold a hearing?
If the student is charged with a felony, then the principal needs to hold a hearing. So the student's charged with a felony, whether it happens on school grounds or off of school grounds. The principal must hold a hearing and make a finding to determine whether, again, the student's continued presence in school would pose a substantial detriment to the general welfare of the school. That's the statutory language. If the principal makes that finding, the principal can choose to suspend or expel a student.
Okay.
And that is current law. That law has,
Standard now.
right, that's
Kelly?
not a
I'm sorry.
change. Yep.
Was MASC involved in this legislation at all? Because it sounds like there was nobody.
Well, that
I mean, just
37,
that example is,
that 37H and a half is, that's
Always been
not
there?
a change of law, no. The only change about that part of the statute, again, is that those students who are regular education students would now be entitled to educational services. But
That's
that,
the
that
point.
law regarding felonies is existing law. Yeah. Okay. So, and again, really, for 37H and 3/4, they really do want principals to look at other ways to impose disciplinary consequences apart from suspensions. So there's discussions about doing things such as excluding students from extracurricular activities, oh, thanks, Glenn, which is not, would not be viewed as a suspension. Looking at restitution, really a push towards looking at things beyond suspensions, because in order to suspend a student, there are now significant procedures that need to be followed. Okay. Okay. And again, the principal is supposed to consider ways with the parent to re-engage the student in the learning process. All right. So under 37H and 3/4, which is the new law, prior to the suspension taking effect, the district will need to provide written notice in English and the home language that tells the student and the parents all of the charges, the reasons for the potential exclusion, and provides an opportunity for a meeting with the principal or designee. And the regulations that support the new statute require that this notice be given, written notice and oral notice, and to try at least through 2 times to get parental participation and to document evidence that you've tried to have the parent come. So again, this would be prior to any suspension or expulsion taking place. And then there would be this meeting, and at that meeting, again, it would be, the due process procedures of the student would be allowed to have an opportunity to be heard regarding the charges. And after the meeting, or which really is going to be viewed more as a hearing, the student is entitled to receive written notice in English and their home language, to have information about the outcome, the evidence that was used to determine it. And again, if the student is going to be suspended for 10 or more consecutive or cumulative days, the notice has to provide the student with a right to appeal and the appeals process. And that appeal would be to the superintendent. And there is no further appeal than the superintendent. The superintendent is the final appeal. And the exclusion would remain in effect pending the appeal.
So, Paige, I was content to be quietly appalled, but let me just make sure I understand this. So, for a suspension where the principal, at least preliminarily, has determined that the student is a detriment and potentially a danger to the school community, can't impose the suspension until there's a hearing, and can't hold a hearing until they've made at least 2 attempts to reach out to the parents.
No, so 37H and 3/4 is, again, for all suspensions except for those under 37H, which is drugs, weapons, assault, and staff.
Okay.
And except for those under 37H and a half, which are felonies. So these would be, these are everything else. So this would be the student-to-student fight, for instance, would be under 37H and 3/4. And so, because for 37H and 37H and a half, there are already notice requirements that we follow, that we have followed. So that really doesn't change for those. For again, this would be everything else. So this would be a student fight. It would be, I don't, someone stealing something at school, anything else except that one would be suspended for.
Well, I think to Ms. Kelly's earlier point, on the assumption that all of us would view assaults on a student in the same class as assaults on a staff member, that could mean that this individual is still in the school environment while the efforts to reach the parent and schedule the hearing are occurring?
That is how the statute was written. And there was an outcry from school administrators
That's encouraging.
and school superintendents because of the dangerous nature of
Right.
it. There was also suggestion that an unintended consequence of that would be more arrests in school, because if you had, for instance, a very large student fight and you had to sort of hold the students until you provided this written notice and an opportunity to come in, that, a principal may have no choice but to contact law enforcement, which would have been not the intent of the statute and an unintended consequence. So what the legislature did is, DESE, in the regulations, they added an emergency removal provision.
Good.
That allows a principal, if the principal determines that the continued presence of the student poses a danger to persons or property or materially and substantially disrupts the order of the school, then the principal can remove the student for 2 days and then hold the hearing, if they find there's no alternative available to alleviate the danger or disruption. So there is now an emergency removal, which really does make a lot of sense.
Okay.
So that was sort of fixed.
Mr. Zulus?
Just a quick one, Paige, I'm sorry. The hearing that you mentioned, so is this to be a public evidentiary hearing, or is it just the meeting? Is it just a hearing for the individual to have their side heard, or is it some kind of...
It really would be a hearing akin to what school administrators already do for students under 37H or 37H and a half. It really is a hearing. That the principal serves as the hearing officer. Generally speaking, another school administrator sort of presents their evidence, that the student is allowed an opportunity to be heard. There's a discussion, and the principal takes that under advisement and then issues a decision. So it's called a meeting in the statute, but the regulations really do call for more of a due process hearing. Again, which exists and happens already under 37H and 37H and a half. Okay. So there is a special process for students kindergarten through grade 3. For any out-of-school suspension, the principal, prior to the suspension, must notify the superintendent in writing and describe the misconduct. And for these students, in-school suspensions will not require this type of notice, but they will count as a suspended day, because as part of this statute, they're going to be notice, there's going to be reporting to the department, and they're going to investigate schools that they feel have higher number of suspensions than they should. So it won't, you don't have to have this process if it's an in-school suspension, but it will count as a suspension. Okay. And there is an appeal process, I think I spoke about, where the superintendent can hear an appeal within 3 school days. And the appeal is really a more formal process, and allows the student to present testimony and to cross-examine witnesses and to have a right to counsel at their own expense, an interpreter, and a decision. And that decision would be final. So, again, this will be, these appeals do exist now under 37H and 37H and a half. The right to cross-examine witnesses is perhaps, a new area that we'll have to explore and talk about, because we'll want to be able to allow the student their due process rights under the statute while preserving the rights of other parties and witnesses.
Ms. Sheridan?
So in order to apply or ask for an appeal, the process is the families of the student have to put it in writing and submit it to the superintendent?
Correct.
So that's not detailed here, but it's just...
It is. It's in the regulations that are fine. I mean, I can go over the regulations also.
I'm just being clear that it's not an automatic thing. You just say, I want an appeal.
Right.
And this is what happens, that you have to request an appeal, and then it has to be reviewed and decided yes. And then an outside person comes in to do that?
No, the superintendent does the appeal. And as the
Or the superintendent's designee?
No,
It has to be the superintendent?
superintendent.
It would,
Oh, another place.
In other places, it might not be.
I believe it could be the superintendent's designee.
May I ask you something?
Yes.
So, I've always been under the impression that all appeals were heard. So you're saying a superintendent doesn't have to hear an appeal?
No, the superintendent would hear one of these appeals. Yes, if it was timely.
So I thought Ms. Sheridan thought that some appeals could be not heard.
No, I guess what I was saying was, just because a parent says, I want an appeal, and it doesn't just, you have to request an appeal. It's
Right.
not, yeah. it's a
Yes, you have to
process for having it.
proactively request the
Right.
appeal to happen, yes. And then during exclusion, again, we talked about that there will be no exclusion for more than 90 school days, except for exclusions under 37H or 37H and a half, and that students have the opportunity to make academic progress. And this is how the statute defines academic progress, and I think we've talked about it. And again, these are some suggestions that DESE has provided, and the principals will be reviewing that this summer and coming up. Each school will have its own educational service plan.
So this is what's different for the school committee to know.
In terms of funding, this is different,
Right.
yes, yes. So that's really an overview of the statute. I have a whole series of regulations. I don't know, do you want me to do those as well? Or I think this provides a pretty good review of what the statute
I think you've
is.
painted the picture here.
And the regulations really sort of clarify the statute, yes.
Ms. Kelly?
Did any funding come along with this legislation?
No.
Good question.
Jeez Louise.
Thanks, Paige.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just have one more question, sorry. So on this one, list of available alternative educational services, that's not school-based, that's district.
It's
Based.
actually school-based. Each
Yes.
principal will come with one. Because it will be different, it may not be that elementary school students could access online learning to the same degree as high school students, so that it would be school to school. Although I would think it would be best in each district that, all elementary schools have the same plan, and all middle schools and all high schools, and that's just my recommendation as opposed to something that's in the law. But,
And I
yes.
Sure, Superintendent.
Also, I had, at the request of the school committee, asked Attorney Tobin about policy, school committee policy and handbook policy.
Yes, and I think I did provide some suggested language for your student handbooks.
Right. And then what about school committee policy on this?
I think I may have gotten a request to look at the policy, so I'll do that and
Good.
revise it as necessary.
So our plan is to discuss with you school committee policy, and then Attorney Tobin is going to review our handbooks so that at our July meeting, we can get the handbooks to you so that you can approve them, and we'll have them printed for the distribution before school starts. But this is a huge change in all of the handbooks.
Ms.
Little
Bagley-Jones?
question.
A little
34
question.
and 35, you talk about pupil attendance, and those aren't new. You're just adding them in here?
There are some new requirements regarding notification. Would you like me to?
No. So we just have to
So-
look at those 34 and 35?
Yes, as part of this law, there were some new requirements regarding procedures for students who are dropping out. There's now a requirement that there be a meeting with interested parties to work with the student and discuss alternatives to dropping out. And then there's some notice requirements to encourage students to have better attendance in terms of notifying parents, developing a plan if a student's absent for a certain period of time. Those are some amendments as well.
And I know that it doesn't come with any money, it's a lot of things, but I do think it's good because it's very clear for folks, especially once it gets into our handbooks, all of this.
Right, and it will
That
be.
all parents know the same information versus just the few that are savvy and know things about the schools.
Correct, and when students
good.
move from district to district, they'll have the same policies and procedures throughout the state, so, yes.
But on behalf of the school district and the principals, after we had Paige Tobin's presentation, it's going to take at each level, coming up with a plan for under the 10 days, the monitoring, who's going to monitor that work, who's going to get that work to the student. Didn't you explain it's actually the difference from a half day to a full day? If you let somebody go home for the full day, right away, you have to have the materials in place, the assignments in place. And then for the longer term, what is the plan? Is it going to be online courses? Is it going to, be some kind of a collaborative that children go to that will guarantee them the appropriate instructional program? So there are lots of discussions among the principals and central office that then we'll bring to the school committee to have our plan in place.
Right. In terms of, students who are excluded, suspended for 10 days or less, I know a lot of districts have sort of online anyway at this point, assignments that are online and through certain systems like Aspen and It's Learning or just some of the.
We have Edline.
Edline. So, again, maybe just reinforcing with teachers that those have to be up to date, and then that would provide a student who is home for a day or two with all of their, should provide a student that's home for a day or two with all of their assignments, and if, they have their materials. So that may be just a process of reinforcing.
You explained a way to take
Right,
care of that.
that with using resources that you already have. Yes,
But that wouldn't suffice after 10 days.
correct.
Mr. Zulus?
Do we have a sense of how many students are suspended on average for more than 10 days a year? Just in terms of getting a sense of the magnitude of the issue here. And maybe we don't know that now,
Well,
maybe that's something to,
Rather than just give the number, I'd rather at the next school committee meeting give you the correct number. But
Yep,
we do
fair
have
enough.
students who are suspended for longer than 10
more than
days.
10 days.
Who aren't special ed.
Right. It's not a, Yeah, it's not a common occurrence. It really, and again, it tends to be just what I see throughout my districts. Students that are really excluded for longer periods of time do tend to fall into sort of the categories of drugs, weapons, assault on staff, or a felony charge. Those do tend to be the majority of longer-term.
And so the goal of this law is, which has been our goal, other than the children who fall under the first two regulations, is to have the children back in school.
It is. There really is an emphasis, particularly in the regulations, of looking at positive behavior supports and other alternative means to suspensions. And they will be, there is a very large reporting requirement that's part of this.
But I think it's important bringing it to the school committee and for the public to know that we're in contact whenever we have a question regarding student discipline, incidents that we might want to discuss. We discuss it with Paige Tobin, and our goal is to have the children, it's a safe and secure environment for all of the children in the Milton Public Schools.
Correct. Yes.
Ms. Sheridan?
I'm sorry, Paige, I just have one more question. Could you explain the difference between the out-of-school suspension and the in-school suspension? So you talked about if someone needs to be moved during the day. Could you just clarify that for me, please?
Yes, and that was clarified more in the regulation. And so the notice requirements really apply to out-of-school suspensions. So there is also encouraging the use of an in-school suspension as opposed to an out-of-school suspension, which would allow the student to remain in school, if there's a place to do so, to get services. And with in-school suspensions, the parent receives notice, but there's not the same hearing requirement or meeting requirement that there is for out-of-school suspension. So that is another alternative that many districts will probably be looking at.
So that could happen during the same day that the incident took place?
Yes.
That you're providing an in-house suspension, and is it counting the same way towards the 10 days?
It counts as a suspension.
Okay.
But again, it doesn't have necessarily.
You don't need the paperwork, the hearing, the
procedural requirements are slightly less, yes.
So could you have a suspension hearing and then actually determine that the best course of action would be to have an in-house suspension?
Yes.
The following day?
Yes, and just again, this is anecdotally, but
Right.
there are school districts that I'm aware of that are really looking into creating sort of that in-school suspension space with perhaps a staff member and, that sort of thing to really
Support.
broaden the resources in that area as a way to avoid the out-of-school suspensions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paige.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. Thank you.
This was great.
Moving on to the Milton Public Schools year and data report. 3 years ago, Chairman Walker had asked us to begin putting all of our data in one report. And so this is really a draft that you were sent. And at our meeting on the 16th, we'll have a longer presentation on the data. And for the public, what we've done, and I want to recognize Maura Downs, what we've done, and it's an excellent resource for the district, brought all of our staffing data, our student data, our class size data, our assessment data. And when we come to the assessment data, you heard tonight the presentation from the Tucker staff, and we were talking to them prior to the meeting. The MCAS data for this year, our advanced placement data, and our SAT data isn't out until the summer. But what we're going to do for the presentation on July 16th is have a presentation of our internal data in English and math for elementary, middle, and high school, and science at the high school, and include that internal summative data reports in this report. Also in this report, I did it number 180 pages. is our athletic data that we presented to CDM at your last meeting. We've included, over the last 3 years, last year, highlights from our principals on successes within their school. This year, we're going to add from our special ed director a section on our special ed data, the number of ed plans per school, out-of-district placements. We're going to have a report from Assistant Superintendent Dr. Pavlicek on our finance. We've asked the individuals who chair our mentoring program to provide you with a summary of our teacher induction program, the number of teachers who are mentored, the professional development that we provide them. And we're also going to add this year a listing of all the professional development options that were offered in the district and the number of staff members who attended each of those sessions. Again, for the viewing public, and after the meeting on the 16th, we'll put the final draft. I had spoken to Chairman Walker. The way we use this data is, you've heard at presentations that the diversity among our entire staff, it only increased 0.1% to 7.6, which was down from a high of 8.2 in the 2012 school year. So when you start to bring all that data together, you're able to identify areas that you have to prioritize. And again, it gives you a source. Once you start to discuss this data, then you start to look at it longitudinally, and you ask for more information. And so very briefly, I was sharing with Chairman Walker that our student enrollment has stayed constant. And so that's a good thing, that ranging from 3,958 students to 4,000. Another positive is that the diversity in our district has remained in the last 2 years at 29.9%. Our English learner population has risen from 6.5 to 7.4%. What I'm going to work with Maura Downs on for you for the next report is that when we do those percentages, I want you to have the number of students that means in the district. Our low-income number is 12.7, yet our free lunch program is 10.3. So we're asking some more questions about that. That low-income data, is that a state number? We understand the free and reduced lunch is self-identified within the district. Our special ed population has decreased from 14.5% to 13.8 over last year. We have our special ed director coming to July 16th meeting to do a presentation on closing the achievement gap in special education, so we'll be discussing that. I had put in one of your green folders a Patriot Ledger article that was very interesting, comparing districts on the South Shore, the percentage of students going on to 4-year universities, 2-year universities, employment, the military. We've included that data in this presentation. And again, our goal is to have to you, as soon as it's public, all of the assessment data, and as a result of your advancement budget, the internal assessments that were put into place this year. So I'm working with the coordinators and the principals. They're actually working on it now that school's out, to give you backup data, but really to bring it together in a summative form for you. So at first grade, you'll be able to tell the number of students and the percentage of students, and what the growth on the internal assessments have been. What are the numbers of levels that they've increased in reading, as just one example. So you have that report online. I would ask you to send me any clarifying questions. I'll get it to you before the week before your next meeting so that you can go over it, and we'll bring it up, and anyone who has questions about a particular section, we'll discuss it. Thank you.
My thanks to the superintendent and Ms. Downs and everyone else who worked on this. It has become a very data-rich and informative report. I'm hopeful that it will serve as the basis or inform at least our discussion at our retreat in August as to how did we do this year, what kind of year did we have. We did have a discussion at the Finance Subcommittee meeting this week, two things that we would like to see in there. One is information, demographics on French and English students and achievement data on French and English students, much like the presentation that we saw from Ms. O'Dwyer probably a couple of years ago now. The other thing, and Superintendent, you alluded to this, but we'd like to make sure that as much as possible the achievement data and performance data is current. So for the 2013-2014 school year rather than for the previous year. And we're hopeful that some of that information can come from the assessment data that we have. And the superintendent and I did have a chance to talk about that, and in fact, we'll have a presentation on that at the July 16th meeting as well, but hopefully it will be included in the end-of-the-year report. Ms. Kelly?
Just one other data point that I think was in our original request that we talked about in the fall was climate and discipline data, which is actually pretty pertinent with the discussion we just had previously, but I think that would be an important set of data to have in the report as well.
And that's timely because we have to report that in the next 2 weeks to the state. So Ms. Downs had done longitudinally 4 years on this data, so we'll gather that data. And that's why I hesitated when Mr. Zulus asked the question, because you should know for all grade levels, we report to the state different incidents in the realm of disciplinary actions.
Great. Oh, Ms. Sheridan?
I just want to say, I think this is an exorbitant amount of information that you've presented to us, and I just would like to be sure that all of it is helpful to the administration as well as to us. I'd not feel good if you were doing all that work for the school committee's purpose if it wasn't something that you found internally supportive, helpful. But also, I had a question, Mr. Walker, you just said that the new data that's become available for our retreat in August, that MCAS data will still be embargoed by that time, so I'm not sure.
No, we acknowledge that we won't have MCAS data, but we should have data from the assessments that we've
The
been
internal
doing
ones,
throughout the
okay.
year. Correct.
I thought that I heard you say something different just now, so I'm sorry.
And
Thank you.
It is valuable because right now, all of these coordinators and principals do these data achievement presentations for you. And so then when we're accessing data or we want to use some of that data, we have to go back to the school committee presentations. And so now what Ms. Downs has done is taken all of the presentations and put them in one place. And the question that you just had, I know to Ms. Kelly's point about the internal assessments, in the discussions we're having with the coordinators now, they're looking to correlate these internal assessments with the MCAS bars, so it's going to be very interesting what reading levels at the particular, they're actually looking at grades 1 and 2, and anxious to see what that third grade MCAS is in relation to the students who have they identified the right bar so that they can, again, work with the students so that everyone, remember, is at proficient and advanced by the end of grade 3. So it's really driving these internal assessments that were hugely, again, I think the most powerful remark from me was a principal said that it really empowered the classroom teacher to have so much information about the child when they sat down with the parents. So we're doing it to drive achievement, but again, when a principal said, now these teachers have so much more information when they sit down with the child's parent or guardians. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now to these advancement job descriptions, what I sent you 3 job descriptions, and these were drafts. And I've received feedback from school committee members, and I'm looking for more feedback. So I haven't, as of today, I haven't given you the edited. If we established a deadline for people to get back to me, but I can wait to have these finalized July 16th.
I think that's too long.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Mary, did you get my edit?
I did.
Oh, okay,
I
because I
did,
looked
but
at
I-
this and said,
No, but these were sent out Friday,
Yep.
so I didn't know whether to take your edits and somebody else's edits and make another copy, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. So these were the initial ones that I'm asking everybody to react to.
So has everyone, let me just ask this question. Has every member who wanted to provide feedback, provided feedback?
I have just one other add, and I can send you something officially on it later, but under the family outreach liaison, if we could outline something in there that, where they would be involved in providing outreach to transfer students, because that was one thing, and I apologize for not getting it to you earlier, that was one thing that some of those students do have
This is-
tendency.
It's unusual I have to say this, but you need to speak a little louder, Ms. Davenport.
So, yeah, so transfer students, they seem to sometimes have a little bit of difficulty, especially at the beginning and what their background is. And so if we had that, this person kind of work with those families and those students, I think that could be a big help. So I can I'll work with you on adding something in regards to that.
So I don't know that we need to discuss the edits. Let's just set a deadline for the end of the week. If anyone who has edits can get them to the superintendent, then if you can send them out one more time, that should do it. Ms. Kelly?
Just, oh, sorry, I appreciate, I think that's a needed resource. I guess on an initial start, I think we have to provide some sort of focus, and I would hope that we're not watering down the expectations around this position so much that we're not utilizing it in the right direction. So, yeah, I mean, to that point, off the top of my head, I don't know how many transfer students we get in a year. If it was 20, that probably is within reason. If it's 100, that's a whole different story. So I guess I would just worry a little bit about that.
I would just say that, I mean, it's kind of already in here, but it says orient families to the Milton Public Schools. So in a way, they're already, helping with that. But,
But they're also going to be part of the Tucker program. I just think we're,
Ms. Bagley Joe?
just in the interest of saving time, I put a ton of edits and changed.
Yeah,
I don't think
I
you should worry about it.
I agree.
And it's in there too, by the way, the transfer piece, but I changed it, I put a lot of edits into it. We can talk about them, but we don't have them in front of us, so, right, Mary, I gave you,
Right.
like, a ton.
Right, so, end of the week, get everyone's edits in, superintendent makes the edits, sends them out one more time.
Good.
We send any questions, comments to the superintendent. Superintendent makes the final decision on what the job specs should look like. Ms. Sheridan?
I just have a question about the instructional technology coordinator or digital technology director. So I had advocated for the instructional technology title. It had originally gone out in our advancement budget as a digital technology director. I would like to advocate for the instructional technology coordinator title, because I think ultimately this will have to go out with one or the other. It can't be both, or can't have an or. So I would like to advocate for the instructional technology coordinator or director. I label, if that's what
Yeah.
would be decided.
Thank you.
That concludes the superintendent's report. Chairman's report, follow-up list. We're actually making good progress. So here's what I still have on our follow-up list. Timeline and strategy for the improvement of science performance. We heard a presentation from Mr. Phelan at our last meeting, which I thought was excellent. The only outstanding issues there are what are the metrics and anticipated outcomes that we expect with regard to improved science performance. But otherwise, I think we can take that off the list. Closing the SPED proficiency gap, same thing. What's the timeline and strategy? As the superintendent said, we'll hear a presentation on that July 16th. And still to be addressed, how do we assess Common Core competency? That's something Ms. Kelly raised a few meetings ago. Finalized fiscal year advancement spending. I believe we'll be hearing something on that just later in this meeting. Partnership with the Milton Public Library on pre-K early literacy. I think that still needs some work, but if I believe you asked Dr. McNeil-Jermai and Ms. Nephew to
Summer.
address that, but I think what we were looking for was a program for the summer, so if we continue to pay attention to that. Pre-K outreach and early literacy program, we heard a presentation on that, and I think Ms. Padera is satisfied, so we're good on that. Mental health services
I
requirements.
haven't followed up on that yet.
Okay.
It's on my list.
Ms. Bagley-Jones has that on her list. School committee park decision-making process and the MCAS park transition. We heard a presentation on that and voted, so I think we can take that off the list. Still to be discussed, the 5-year financial plan. Quite a few things. What's the timeline? What are the assumptions we're using? What do we expect for an override request if there is one? What does the deliverable actually look like, and what's the committee charge? Still need to hear about that. I think, Dr. Pavlicek, you've got the lead on that.
Let me ask a question about
Yeah.
that. I had put that on our running list at Finance Subcommittee to talk about it at Finance Subcommittee and then bring it to School Committee.
I think that makes perfect sense, yeah. And then relatively new to the list, I think at our last meeting, Ms. Padera asked for a bus fee comparison. And new tonight, I've added, I think we need a report on how extensively EdLine is being used and how up-to-date it is, because these new student discipline requirements raise the stakes on that. That's all I have. Question? Ms. Kelly?
Just on the EdLine,
Yeah.
two things. The first is, for some reason, I'm thinking that somehow it was in our contract, so,
It is
Yeah.
in our contract.
but, and the other thing is, it used to be that in EdLine you could log on to each of the individual schools, and you can't do that anymore, so I'm wondering what's going on there. I don't know whether something changed, but even if you weren't, in other words, if you weren't a parent, you still could go, you couldn't see individual student data, but you could go on to each of the individual schools and see what was going on, so
Find
I
it.
think it might be something worth looking at. And then on the list, if we could add, I think we need to evaluate the implications of the new discipline policy and understand, there are costs associated with it. There's no way around that. We have to have some estimates around what it will cost so that we're not going in blind into this new school year.
And
Yeah?
could I just amend the EdLine thing, instead of having Ms. Gormley figure out who's using it or how much it's being used, because that is one of the things from the disciplinary things, how are we going to implement it? I don't want to take time to find out how many are using it or not, because the question is, how are they going to be using it? Like, do you know what I mean, Mary? Instead of you measuring it,
Right.
what are you going to do to make sure they're using it?
Right,
If that's okay with you, Mr.
Absolutely.
Butler. To change that a little bit.
Perfect.
And-
How do we get the result we need?
and I had also had on the Finance Subcommittee meeting for Dr. Pavlicek, I thought we were going to do the transportation and the 5-year plan. I think that's on the running list, and then come to School Committee with it. You had asked for a transportation analysis.
Great. Finance Subcommittee?
Thank you. The first item is approval of vendor warrants. So, Dr. Pavlicek, do you have the grand total for this warrant?
This is warrant number 52, in the amount of $323,764.09.
Can you give me that amount again?
$323,764.09.
So I would move approval of vendor warrant number
52.
52. Second?
Can I ask, has anyone signed off, any school committee members signed off on that yet?
3 have. I need one more tonight,
Okay. All I need to know.
so I have to get it to Town Hall tomorrow.
On the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Abstain? 402.
Next item is the FY14 advancement spending. Dr. Pavlicek, do you want to, for some reason, I'm thinking we already talked about this.
I
but
thought we did too.
Didn't we do that at a school committee meeting?
We did.
Didn't we talk about that last meeting?
I think we did.
We did.
I was sort of having
did?
deja vu. Yeah. But if there's any questions,
We did.
we'll gladly entertain them.
Was it
Okay,
different one?
then, moving right along.
All right.
No, then we already talked about it.
Yes, moving right along. The FY15 advancement positions. And it says attachment, but I don't know that we have an attachment, do we?
I think the
don't-
reference was into the job descriptions.
Right, so as Ms. Kelly and I clarified at the beginning of the meeting, this is a vote to increase the digital education position from a half-time to a full-time position, and the data analyst from a half-time to a full-time position. That's the full scope of this vote. Yes?
I would ask, do we have the running sheet? I think we talked about it last year.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't put in this packet the running sheet from finance.
But Dr. Pavlicek, do you have a copy?
I'll put that just like we do enrollment in every packet.
And the only thing I'm looking for is just what are the costs that we're adding?
Right.
So that we have context.
I might have it here.
I apologize, I thought I had it with me, but I do. While we're searching for that, do we need to have just a brief discussion as to why we're asking to do this?
Yes, we had, the original proposal, we had lengthy discussion in Finance Subcommittee about half-time positions, full-time positions, and then when we started to do the job descriptions, and then doing the analysis in other districts, we realized that to Ms. Sheridan's point, we're calling the
Technology coordinator.
had to be was a full-time position, and we looked at the job description and the work that was going to be done in the district, and then the family, it was in the original proposal, and then the family outreach liaison, if we change the title, again, when you heard the discussion tonight about the preschool transfer students, Ms. Bagley-Jones has told me since the first time we mentioned that position that it would have to be a full-time position. And then the instructional data analysis person, this is going to be, you can just see by the evidence of the 166 pages developed with the data in the district and the requests for data. And every time we do a presentation, other questions come up, and the value of the data, and using, really driven by the advancement budget, that we're going to be evaluating the use of those funds and how they drove student achievement around the data. We're recommending that each of them be a full-time position. And so what we did at Finance Subcommittee, for those who weren't there, to Ms. Kelly's point, and I'll put that sheet in every green folder, is to monitor our spending, watching our enrollment, and so we costed out what the increases would be. Did you find it, Glenn?
Well, the increase, I'm looking for my overall sheet, but I think this is it. The instructional technology position is on the order of $37,000 to move it up from a half-time to a full-time. The The other position is on the order of $27,000 to move it up from a half-time to a full-time. So the two of them together, it's approximately $64,000 cost to increase these two positions from half to full.
And the sheet that we're looking for lack of a better description, is gazintas and gazoutas, right?
Yes.
The money that's going in and the money that's going out in order to balance off
Right.
those
keep a-
increases.
Is that Ms. Kelly?
Yeah, and just, in years past, we've added positions, and I think we're it's the evolution of the Milton Public Schools. We're constantly looking at what we need to do to improve. And in this case, the advancement budget proposed a half-time position, which, as you pointed out, probably was not fillable, and therefore, the advancement will be enhanced by us increasing those to 1.0. And we don't take this lightly. We really have scoured the budget, looking for ways that we can offset this increased spending. So I just want to give a little context to it's not like we're going to be doing this every meeting, but this is an important effort in terms of improvement achievement for all students, so.
I do have the sheet. I don't know if you want me to walk through it, absent having it in front of you.
No,
Okay.
I think we just needed to know the total increased cost that would be.
Yeah, on the sheet that we had before, it was $37,500 for the instructional technology position and $25,000 for the data specialist.
and the bottom line, the total, what we called unanticipated expenses was, and what's the delta?
As of 2 weeks ago, when we last did this at Finance Subcommittee, we had, on the ins and outs, we had identified between adding a full-day kindergarten teacher, a grade 2 co-taught preschool teacher, and so forth, about $240,000 in ads, but we had about $237,000 in subtracts and added revenue, so it was, at that point, fairly revenue neutral.
Great. Ms. Sheridan?
Just in addition to what you just said, Mrs. Kelly, I think the instructional technology coordinator position as a K-12 position, in addition to not probably having a lot of people who would apply for it as a half-time position, knowing that the needs of a K-12 district are immense, I just want to reiterate that, it's not just that it wasn't fillable, but that the job description was far greater than a half-time position would support.
And I think in coordination with that, the efforts that are going on in terms of purchasing new technology.
Exactly.
And the effort that will be needed for professional development to have all teachers utilizing that technology in a really efficient way. I think it's a highly needed position, and I think it makes perfect sense.
And I see it honestly as an investment in all the materials that the district is purchasing. It's an investment in making sure that they're properly utilized and implemented. Thanks.
And to Mrs. Kelly's point, it's interesting that you brought that up because Assistant Superintendent Phelan and I and Holly Concanon worked with the Milton Foundation for Education, and they have approved spending on professional development this summer, but held all purchases until this person's in place.
Do you have a motion to increase the digital education and data analyst positions from half-time to full-time positions?
So moved. Oh,
Thank you.
second.
Thank you. Moved by Ms. Padera, seconded by Ms. Kelly. On the motion, all in favor? It's unanimous. And that concludes Finance Subcommittee. Old business, there is none.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Yes.
one last thing. Mr. Pavlicek had mentioned in his email on this past warrant that we will be having weekly warrants and maybe multiple warrants in a week over the next several weeks, so that we may need people to come in and sign.
And we will. I mean, next week being a short week because of the 4th of July holiday, actually the warrant will probably not be ready for the following Monday. It might be ready Wednesday, but it might be the following Monday. And but there will definitely be 2 more warrants for fiscal year 14, as we try to close out all the purchase orders and get there. We can run fiscal 14 warrants until July 10th. So there'll probably be, one around July 3rd, or July 4th, either just before or just after, and then another one around July 10th. So even though we don't have school committee meetings, I will be asking you to come in and sign the warrant.
Any next meeting agenda? Oh, Ms. Sheridan? Well, you see, Mr. Zulus is blocking.
Are you trying to blame it on Mr. Zulus?
Well, in that particular instance, yes.
I'll accept the blame.
So when I was the chair, I had initiated a warrant signing document where it was on a rotating basis, and I think I would like to suggest that based on summer vacation schedules, it might be a good thing to do that for the summer months, so that if there are, multiple warrants, as Dr. Pavlicek is explaining, that it might be helpful to know who's expected to sign when, so that they're not guessing who's going to be coming in to sign, so just wanted to put that forward.
You volunteering to recreate that document that you created?
No.
Okay, well, it's a good suggestion, thank you very much. Any new next meeting agenda items? Ms. Sheridan?
I'd like to do an old business, if
Okay.
that's okay. So I just want to thank everyone in the community for coming out to 2 days of great events last weekend for We Are Milton celebration. Over 3,000 people were there on Saturday for a great music festival and fireworks, and Sunday approximately 1,500. It was hard to gauge because people came and went throughout the day continuously. But it was a wonderful 2 days. The weather supported us, and the townsfolk came out, and it was a great celebration of community. So thank you to all.
Thank you, and thank you and your committee for all of your work on that.
Team effort.
No one for citizen speak, since there's no one in the audience. And I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session, not to return to public session, for the purpose of discussing contract negotiation strategy with non-union personnel, the discussion of which in public session would be detrimental to our negotiating position. Ms. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Bagley Jones? Mr. Zulus?
Yes.
Ms. Padaro?
Yes.
Ms. Walker? Ms. Walker, whoa! Ms. Sheridan? Yes. Mr. Walker, yes.